Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No
No
Darkness
darkness,
But
but
Ours.
the hammy
Yes,
laughter is kind of like becoming a
yeah,
part of
we're gasping because this week we're going to talk about underwater horror,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and
it's
it's
underwater.
it's it's interesting to go from underground horror to underwater horror, because the next thing, of course, is space.
Final frontier of terror. I
Yeah,
mean, I mean, not just underwater horror. I mean, I just think anything when you get to large bodies of water. I mean, you get to the sea. You don't have to be under it for it to be terrifying, and even
absolutely.
the sea is scary in a way that even big lakes can't quite be because you're usually in sight of land with those places. Although there are, um, I'm sure we'll find some horror stories of rivers and lakes.
Yeah, I mean that there's a there's a poem that I remember from childhood where the chorus goes, "There is far more sea than land, my boys. There is far more sea than land," and that's just the truth. The parts of the world that stick out of the sea are dwarfed by the parts that lie underneath the sea, the ocean, the parts of our world that are underwater, and most of that has not been mapped particularly well
Yeah,
because once you go down past a certain level, it becomes like being in outer space,
yeah,
not just because it's full of weird things and oh, who knows what's down there. It's because it's dark as fuck, and crushingly dense in terms of gravity, and the pressure. I, I always remember the story of a guy who had was he was down in one of those huge suits, working on something at basically the lowest level, the lowest depth that you can work at as a human being. And suddenly he realized that there was something wrong with his air hose.
jeez,
And he had to unplug it and then rely on the amount of air that he had in his suit. And by the time they got him, he was so close to death. It was like other people had to come down and rescue him. And,
yeah,
the idea of being inside this suit at the bottom of the sea in, where you can't move and you can't breathe, and there are things that live down there. Luckily, none of them were interested in him because he was basically
yeah,
just kind of lying on the bottom of the sea.
yeah.
You know?
Well, there is all sorts of crazy shit down there, and again, some of it we don't entirely know. We don't
Yeah.
know. We don't quite know the full extent of all the things that could be down there, and might still be lying in wait. I mean, it's an old kind of theme. Even, I mean, obviously we need to talk about Lovecraft in this context, but I think even before Lovecraft, you have, I mean, one of the earliest ones I can think of is H.G. Wells's In the Abyss,
Yes.
um, which, I mean, we could talk about, obviously, this, we could talk a bit about Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the
In the
Sea,
abyss
but
in the abyss is incredible, but I also remember that story that he wrote where there's something wrong with a guy's eyes, and
oh, yeah.
he's according to what he's seeing, he's on an island somewhere. The island is full of auks, you know, and various, but otherwise it's pretty much a very deserted island. He
Yeah.
has no real idea of where it is. And he's actually in a hospital because something went wrong with his eyes. And I think, and he's in a wheelchair. And at one point, somebody starts pushing him down the hallway, and he's just going, "No, no, 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 don't do that. No, no, we have to turn around. We have to turn around because it's like he's getting pushed off the island into the sea, and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and everything's getting blacker and blacker. And there's like a dead whale down there that's being eaten by a squid.
Oh, jeez.
It's just like, at first I was kind of interested, but now I'm just like, no. It's like, I don't know what the fuck. You have to turn around. Just take me back inside.
The Remarkable Case of Davidson's Eyes.
Yes, The Remarkable Case of Davidson's Eyes.
Thought that sounded familiar.
Yeah. And I so identified with that when I read it, and I read it pretty early on. I think I got a hold of that at a like a collection of H.G. Wells stories at a secondhand bookstore. It was quite old. It had like pasteboard covers. I think it was probably printed around 1900 or something like that. And and I just remember, much like the one about the guy who worships a dynamo. It's like fucking strange stuff that H.G. Wells wrote.
Uses of the N-word. I seem to remember that one.
That is to be fair, unfortunately. But yeah, there's some incredible, or the flowering of the strange orchid.
Oh yes, which reminds me a bit of there's a Frank Belknap Not Long I'm thinking of, Shades of Clark Ashton Smith's The Seed from the Sepulchre, I think.
Exactly. It's like, man, that really hurts. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, so of course he wrote one called The Sea Raiders, which had sort of the British coast being attacked by giant squid. So I mean, there's loads of stuff.
Yeah,
like this.
You expect it to be kind of Doctor Who-ish, and it so is not. It is very, very vicious and very
Doctor Who did manage a few maritime monstrosities in its time as well, like the Sea Devils and Warriors of the Deep, which I have a soft spot for.
Yep, absolutely. But the thing with H.G. Wells is that almost nothing that he throws at you is something you can talk to.
No. And a lot of the time, his skill, the horror component of his stuff, is often overlooked by people who are obviously what people notice is this guy is like the godfather of sci-fi.
Yeah, but The Invisible Man is horrifying. The Island of Dr. Moreau is really horrifying. It's like, and then I came back to, civilization, and I just can't distinguish between people and animals anymore. And I just want to live somewhere where I don't see anybody.
And he could do some pretty straight. Wells could do some pretty straight up horror stories like Pollock and the Porroh Man, which is a pretty. There's no science fictional element in that at all. That is a straightforward, guy being haunted, basically a colonialist arsehole who's killed a native.
That's right.
Is basically haunted by that native until he finally kills himself, and it's one of these. It's interesting because
direct antecedent to When Spoilers Bleed.
Yes, Clive Barker.
Yeah,
but it's interesting because
spoilers bleed.
You mentioned the Lord of the Dynamos. There's some fair bit of use of the N-word there, but mostly from this chief engineer who constantly berates and bullies his Indian subordinate, who eventually sacrifices him to the dynamo. So it's kind of like I was never quite sure. I was actually a little taken aback to discover that Wells was quite virulently racist and had quite exterminationist views when it came to sort of non-white people. I was kind of like, oh shit. Sadly, these were not entirely, these were a lot more common than we'd like, even among people supposed to be progressive, because eugenics was not the discredited pseudoscience that it is now. Disappointing.
But at the same time, whenever he showcases that in his fiction, often he gives that kind of language to a person that you would like to see killed, who then does get killed.
Yeah, so there's an
Yeah.
ambiguity. There's an ambiguity there.
Yeah.
I think it's a case of sort of sometimes the material is more intelligent than the writer. I think somebody said this about Mel Gibson. Or did we say this about Mel Gibson?
We did say that about Mel Gibson, because Mel Gibson, oh my God, he has a lot of problems, but he is actually a really good filmmaker.
Yeah, and yeah,
Great.
the fact that he could make a film like Hacksaw Ridge,
Yeah.
which is kind of like,
Let alone Apocalypto, you know, where.
oh, I mean, Apocalypto is a work of fucked up brilliance.
Yeah.
You know, arguably only someone who was, several sandwiches short of a picnic could have actually conceived this thing. I mean, I think somebody actually said the director whose work it most reminded them of was Leni Riefenstahl. You draw what comparisons you can there. But I mean, with Hacksaw Ridge in particular, I love Apocalypto. I think it's brilliant, and I think the Passion of the Christ, problematic though it may be, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Gary McMahon described this as the Crucifixion as directed by Lucio Fulci, which
basically, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really, because we're used to seeing the Passion as this kind of series of images, the Stations of the Cross, and I think one of these, what this really brought home was, holy shit,
that would be awful.
This was seriously horrific suffering that this person went through.
This was not abnormal.
Exactly.
One of the things about watching Spartacus, the TV movie, is that it goes all the way through the war of the gladiators, and you know what happened at the end of that?
Oh yeah, they crucified the whole fucking army.
Everybody was fucking crucified. So all the characters that you have gotten to know for all this time, get crucified, except for the nice gay couple who go off and get a goat farm and take care of the kids, which is nice. That's actually lovely. But yeah, every other fucking person gets crucified.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly seeing. It's been a few years since we watched it, but remembering that, and of course, it really lends real weight or real power to, when this guy basically goes, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing.
Yes.
About the people who just put him through all that.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary. But okay, again, that's kind of works in the matrix of Mel Gibson's, very quite, his extreme traditionalist Catholic views are well known. The depiction of the Jews in the Sanhedrin in that film a lot has been said about that. It nonetheless remains a powerful piece of cinema.
It's straight up Caravaggio, basically. It's like,
Yeah. But I mean, Hacksaw Ridge is a film which heroizes a pacifist. It's a film where the main character is a man who refused to use violence against other human beings. It takes that as his starting, and yet a man who was also who was not a coward, who actually showed extraordinary physical courage and saved the lives of countless people. And of all the directors you would think would have wanted to bring that story to life, I don't think Mel Gibson would have been the top of anyone's list there. No. And yet there it is, and it's an extraordinary achievement. But yeah, as with Wells, again, I think sometimes the stories being told have more wisdom and sensitivity than the person
telling them,
or at least professes in there when they're kind of.
Well, that's what I always hope about myself. But yeah.
I think I said before, I'm pretty sure the part of me that does the writing is considerably smarter than the rest of me, and that's
okay. So let's go back to the sea. Let's just go back to the sea.
Yes, I do like to be beside the seaside, as they say.
Yes, absolutely. As things creep up through the tide, one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life was the time that my dad took me to the Barrier Reef, the Great Barrier Reef, in Australia, off the coast of Australia, and I actually got to swim over. All right, so near the shore, about 30 feet out. There's a slope, but it's a pretty gentle slope, and you get to see a lot of when the tide goes out, there'll be a lot of exposed coral, but it's very small coral. And you'll see brittle stars and things like that, crawling around, gigantic slugs, snails that you can, abalone, with like that you can pick up and watch go across your hand and everything like that. Now, about 30 feet out, at the bottom of the gentle slope, before things start to go a little more, then you get bommies of like big brain coral. And one time I went around one of those and found I'd been following a very small manta ray, and I went around one of those, and there was its mom. And the little manta ray sort of went whoop underneath the really huge one, and the two of them took off into the deep.
Wow.
So that was incredible. But then one time we went on a boat that took us out to a much larger part of the reef, and the reef itself, as opposed to an island off the reef. With reefy elements, and you're going across this section of reef that is probably like, I don't know, a mile.
Wow.
And it's down far enough that you really would need a tank to go down so far that you could see in intense detail. I did not have a tank. I had a snorkel. And once you go past a certain distance, you realize that you are right next to the edge of the reef. And the edge of the reef is like a cliff that goes down into darkness.
Wow.
It just goes right down into darkness. And the moment that I realized that and started to panic because I was over the darkness, I also realized that I was stuck in a bloom of jellyfish.
Oh, shit.
I mean, luckily they weren't, obviously they stung because jellyfish sting. That's how they catch things. But obviously they were not, they weren't, Portuguese man-o'-war or something like that. I didn't have to, no one had to pee on me when I got back up onto the boat. But yeah, it was the thing of turning around and seeing that the boat you came on is literally floating over what looks like nothing. It's floating in space, except it's not. It's floating in water. And the thing about water is, it's like there's so much crossover in water horror, underwater horror in particular, which goes to that science fictional place.
Yeah.
Because being under the sea is as close, aside from the really extremophile parts of the human experience, most of which we try to stay away from, unless you're those two French scientists who eventually got killed by the volcanoes that they were studying, from Fires of Love, the amazing documentary about their life and work.
Shows my discussion about polar exploration in our first podcast as well.
Yeah, exactly. But most of us stay away from places like that. Whereas the ocean is like very difficult to stay away from, in fact, because ocean is everywhere. Sea is everywhere.
Cross it in one form or another to get from.
Yeah. So every time you get on a plane and you go to another country, if you're from North America, it's like if I wanted to go visit you, I'm flying 8 hours, and most of it is over the ocean. And there's no way that you can't, it's like, I got very used at an early age to getting on a plane and getting off in Australia. And it was kind of like going into, particularly the jaunt from Fiji to Sydney is very much like going into a room, and then 15 hours later you come out on another continent.
Yeah, I've never been on a plane, I have to admit. Never traveled
Really?
on a... No.
Wow.
I've only really been out of the UK my teens when we went to France. I've never really had the wealth to sort of to had enough money to sort of like. I suppose I should definitely try to do that. Definitely try to go to an overseas one. But yeah, whenever we travelled from Britain to France, it was usually by ferry. I think if I remember rightly, we once went by hovercraft.
Yeah.
Which,
well,
back in the
and also, you know, if you're going to Ireland, you know, you take that huge ass ferry that you can watch a fucking movie in. You know, where they
there's the Stena link actually leaves from Liverpool. I'm well from Birkenhead. When I was working in my day job until last year, we were just round the corner from there, and we just found.
Yeah, you think, well, that's not such a big deal, but it is a big deal because you're still, you know,
the atmosphere is full of shipwrecks. I mean, the area around the Isle of Man, particularly, is notorious for it. And there's a whole if I go for along there's the promenade that leads from kind of Wallasey, which is where we are, up to New Brighton, which is basically. If you look at the Mersey estuary, on one side you've got Liverpool and the docks, and on the other side you've got the sort of eastern part of the Wirral, and New Brighton is basically the top corner of the Wirral. It's a sort of seaside resort, although some of the ambience is kind of spoiled by all these fucking docks and cranes kind of just across the way. But yeah, you know, you'll see everything going out to sea or coming in from the sea there. But if you go along the promenade, you will see lots and lots of plaques about the various shipwrecks of the Mersey. Now, never mind what's just outside, you know, just outside the estuary mouth. We're just talking in you'll even see the remains of a few ships' ribs. In fact, round the corner from where I worked, there's the East Float docks, which is next to the old hydraulic dock tower, which is now being done up into a new into apartments or something, which is nice because it's a fantastic old building and has long been due for it. But just next to that float there was a shipwreck, a marine research vehicle called the Sarsia, which sank at its mooring. I think supposedly somebody stole the seacocks, and there are a lot of jokes made in Manchester, where I came from. There are a lot of jokes made at the expense of people from Liverpool, you know, sort of stealing the hubcaps off cars, or you know, if you your car unattended, it's up on bricks with the wheels gone. So the Mancunian in me thought, oh my god, that's about as scouse as you can get. You know, left the boat unattended and they nicked the seacocks, but they forgot to put it up on bricks. And it's been there since like 1998 because the owners obviously couldn't be asked. Kind of, it's kind of like the cost of retrieving it is, and so it's just sat there. And of course, it's become a home to the marine life that it was originally designed to research. It's named the Sarsia is actually a kind of an undersea.
The dereliction. You know, I mean, there's that amazing. There's a bunch of this. William Hope Hodgson did a bunch of.
We can't believe we didn't mention him before.
Yeah, did a bunch of sea horror, a bunch of sea-based horror. And again, this isn't under the sea, that's on the sea, you know.
You got the Glen Carrig, his first published novel.
Yeah.
Which, but I mean, he wrote a whole cycle of stories about
the voice of the night. Is that?
Oh my god, yeah, that's The Voice of the Night's an amazing.
Oh god, you know, it's like there's a reason that the Japanese took that and made it into Matango, you know. It's just like,
and I think it's a friend of Wells's, and you can see the influence. I mean, I can say The House on the Borderland, where you know there's the bit where the narrator is kind of like is seeing time sort of speed up around him, so he's like hurtling through to like the final death of the earth, and stuff. It's a lot of it really recalls the time traveler's description of the time machine of how he sees sort of time pass as he hurtles forwards.
Yeah.
Through that. I can't quite remember who wrote what first.
Yeah. So there's this feeling on the sea of, you know, if something goes wrong, then you are screwed, because you're going to get scurvy. You'll have no water to drink. You will get eaten by some giant fish or a swarm of fish. You will drift forever. Something will happen to you and no one will ever find out what the fuck happened to you. People will go insane and just jump into the, you'll get becalmed, like that amazing section in Master and Commander. Far Side of the World. Peter Weir totally gets that. Everything.
And there's the insanity, the isolation. I mean, if you've ever heard of Donald Crowhurst?
No.
No, I mean, this is a
Oh, wait a minute. Was he a guy who was doing one of those round the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've done a couple of film versions about this with The Mercy, which I think is with Colin Firth, and there's another one. There's also a documentary about it, but essentially there was some sort of prize for kind of circumnavigating the world, and I think he was angling for the third prize. He was something of an inventor and a designer. He designed a thing called a navigator, which I think was a decent gadget, but hadn't really sold very well. And he designed his own ship, the Tynemouth Electron, which was a trimaran, and but it wasn't really ready for what was going to be going ahead. So what he essentially decided to do was to fake it. He was going to produce a fake log and make it look as if he'd done it in good time, but not enough to win first prize, when everything would be very scrutinized, but enough that he'd win a substantial amount of prize money. But what I think happened was that one guy had to drop out of the race because his ship was wrecked. Another guy basically went a little bit doolally and just decided to keep on sailing around the world. And again, he was just like, you're falling in love with the sea. And so all of a sudden, it was like, oh yeah, your first prize. But what happened is he just basically went out of his mind. Yeah. He went completely insane.
And he started hallucinating that there was someone on the boat with him.
I can't remember if there's that, but there's a lot. One of the logbooks they found, he was like, he was. I think there was some truly insane religious rantings where he was, or where he believed he was, where he was like conversing with God, or he thought he was. But I mean, the final bit, I think, says, I will resign the game if you agree, such and such, and the last lines in the diary of, it is finished, it is finished, it is the mercy.
That is amazing. Yeah. So, it's like, and the further you go away from land, the more you lose any sense of where the fuck you are. And the more you lose the sense that land ever existed. And the utter changeability of the sea, the fact that weather blows up so fast, so fierce, so weirdly, you could find yourself, sailing into a typhoon. You could find yourself surrounded by water spouts. You could find yourself fog locked. One of George Miller's non Mad Max movies that I think everyone should watch is called Dead Calm. And there's basically only 3 people in this film. And, a couple played by
Sam Neill, isn't it? And Nicole
Sam
Kidman.
Neill and Nicole Kidman. And Nicole's quite young at this point, have lost their son to a horrible accident. One of the worst accidents I've ever seen on film. And she is depressed as shit. She's barely conscious. So he takes her out on their boat. And the idea is, we're going to go out, and the sea and the sun will, and being alone together, will heal you. And they come across a guy on a sinking ship, and they rescue him. Yes. And this turns out to be a terrible idea, shall I say, because he's crazy as shit, and ends up, marooning Sam Neill on this sinking ship, which he has to get into enough shape that he can pursue this guy who has kidnapped his wife.
Yes. And she's stuck board this ship with a certifiable nutcase.
Yes, and she has to fight him any way she can.
Yeah.
From seduction to murder. And there's something about being on the sea that will strip you down, particularly if you're at the mercy of the wind. And it's like, I disagree with Keanu Reeves. It's like under the ocean, exciting. Over the ocean, exciting. On the ocean, not so exciting. Speed 2. Why he didn't do Speed 2. On the ocean can be super exciting, but you have to know how to deal with it.
No Darkness But Ours is made possible through generous donations from horror enthusiasts just like you. If you'd like to support us, you can sign up to our Patreon and get access to exclusive content, or you can make a one-off donation via Ko-Fi. Links in the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the comments, share and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Let us know as well if there's anything you'd really like to hear us talking about in the future, and we'll be back with more at the same time next week.
So, until next time, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I have been, as usual, Gemma Files, and this remains No Darkness But Ours.